So if you're a genius with 1% and really a super genius at 3, what are you with 59? I don't know.
What are you with 59? That's the question Trump asked his crowd. And they went wild. Standing ovation energy for a trade deficit claimed that, and we're going to get into this, does not hold up. But before the numbers, let's just sit with that moment for a second. Because the President of the United States just called himself a super genius on stage with a microphone in front of thousands of people who are cheering him for it. And the thing is, that's not even the most dishonest line in this speech. This rally was a masterclass in something specific. It wasn't just bragging, it was the deployment of large, specific, uncheckable sounding numbers delivered at rally speed, fast enough that nobody stops to ask questions, big enough that they feel historic, and vague enough that they're hard to immediately disprove in the moment. 59%. 18 trillion. $4,000. 300,000 bureaucrats. These are the numbers Trump put on the table at this rally, and we're going to go through every single one of them. But first, let's set the context, because this speech wasn't just a list of achievements, it was Trump telling his supporters a specific story, that before him, America was dying, that under Biden, nothing worked, that the federal government was stuffed with useless workers doing nothing, that America was so far gone that the Saudi king looked at it and saw a corpse, and that Trump, and only Trump, brought it back from the dead. That's the frame. Now let's look at the facts. He said 300,000 federal workers were removed from payrolls, that some of them had 10, 11, 12 people doing one job. And then, watch this line, he said those fired workers are happy now because they got private sector jobs and are making more money. That's a remarkable claim, because the mass federal layoffs executed through DOGE have been some of the most chaotic, legally contested workforce actions in modern American history. Courts have blocked reinstatements, agencies have been functionally gutted, and the workers who lost those jobs, many of them veterans, many of them serving in critical public health and safety roles, are not exactly flooding social media with thank you notes. But at this rally, they're happy, they're thriving, they're better off. That's the story. And then he moved to the economy. And this is where the speech gets genuinely remarkable.
After decades of other countries stealing our jobs and plundering our wealth, thanks to our strong policy on tariffs, we cut our gaping trade deficit. Now, if you do 1%, you're considered like a genius. If you do 2 or 3%, it's unheard of. We cut it by 59% this year, our trade gap. It's the largest drop of a trade gap. Think of it. It's the largest drop in history, the history of our country. 59%. Can you believe it? So if you're a genius with 1% and really a super genius at 3, what are you with 59? I don't know. As part of our tax cuts, we delivered, a lot of you benefited by this, no tax on tips, no tax on overtime. No tax on Social Security for our great seniors. You know, the great big beautiful bill is really the great big beautiful tax cut bill, but it was also, we gave you the right to deduct your interest payments on a car loan, but only if it's made in the USA. That's been incredible. You never had that right before. And this week, millions of Americans received the largest tax refunds of their lives. The average is more than $4,000 per filer. Think of that. So nobody knew this was going to happen, but now they're getting their refunds back, and they're much larger than I said. In other words, I under-exaggerated, which is good. And in 4 long years, Sleepy Joe Biden, have you heard of him? What a president, what a disaster. But the whole party, it was the party. He didn't run the country. The people surrounding the Resolute desk in the Oval Office, they ran the party. Radical left lunatics. But in 4 long years, Sleepy Joe Biden got less than $1 trillion invested in our country, much less. And in 12 months, so think of it, 4 years, ours is 12 months, and it's actually 11 because we haven't gotten the last month. So in 11 months versus, think of that, versus 4 years, they did less than $1 trillion. In 11 months, we did $18 trillion of new investments coming into our country. And that's a record for any country anywhere in the world by a lot. And the king of Saudi Arabia told me when I was in Saudi Arabia, they invested $2 trillion in our country. But he looked at me, he said, you know, Mr. President, a short time ago, we viewed the United States as a dead country. We thought it was dead. And now you have the hottest country anywhere in the world. And he's right, the hottest country anywhere in the world.
Let's go number by number, because each one of these claims deserves its own spotlight. The 59% trade deficit claim. This is the headliner. Trump said the trade deficit dropped 59%, the largest drop in American history. And in a narrow technical sense, there is some data behind this. But here's the critical context he left out. The trade deficit narrowed sharply in early 2025 because American companies, anticipating Trump's own tariffs, went on a massive import binge in the months before the tariffs hit. They front-loaded imports. Then when the tariffs landed, imports slowed. The deficit dropped not because of brilliant trade policy, but because of a one-time distortion caused by the policy itself. The trade deficit fell because of the panic before the tariffs, not because of the tariffs working. So yes, the number is technically real. The interpretation Trump put on it is not. The $18 trillion investment claim. Biden did less than $1 trillion in 4 years. Trump did $18 trillion in 11 months. That is the claim. There is no credible economic source for $18 trillion in new private investment in 11 months. The entire U.S. GDP is around $28 trillion. He appears to be adding up announced investment pledges, many of which are speculative, multi-year, conditional projections from companies that made them as goodwill gestures during diplomatic visits. An announcement is not an investment. A pledge is not a dollar in the ground. That number is not real in any meaningful economic sense. The $4,000 tax refund claim. He said this week millions of Americans received the largest tax refunds of their lives, averaging more than $4,000. The Ears does report that average refund amounts were running higher in early 2025 than prior years. But the gap is more modest than Trump's framing suggests, and it's partly attributable to withholding changes and timing, not policy outcomes. The largest refunds of their lives framing is, as stated in the rally, not supported by what the Ears has actually published. And then there's this line, this accidental confession buried in the bragging. In other words, I under-exaggerated, which is bad. Read that again. Trump just told his audience out loud that his own previous claims were too conservative. That reality exceeded his numbers. This is a man who has spent years being fact-checked for exaggeration, and his response to getting caught is to reframe the direction of the error. Not I was wrong, not I overstated, but I under-exaggerated. The numbers were too small, reality was even bigger. That's not a gaffe. That's a tell. The Saudi king story. And then, perhaps the most extraordinary moment in the speech, Trump relayed a conversation with the Saudi king in which the king supposedly said America was a dead country before Trump came along. And Trump's response on stage was, and he's right. The President of the United States agreed out loud at a rally in front of his own supporters that America was a dead country before him. That is the pitch. That is the foundation of everything. And the crowd cheered. Here is what actually happened at this rally. Trump made a series of large, specific economic claims, a 59% trade deficit drop, $18 trillion in investment, $4,000 average tax refunds that either misrepresent the data, rely on methodology his own economists would struggle to defend, or are simply not supported by any published public. Figures. He told a crowd of supporters that the 300,000 federal workers who lost their jobs are happy now. He called himself a super genius. He accidentally admitted he makes numbers up by saying he under-exaggerated. And he agreed, nodding along, that America was a dead country before he arrived. This is what a victory lap looks like when the victories don't fully exist. Big numbers. Fast delivery. Enormous crowd. No one stopping to ask, where did 18 trillion come from? Where is that in the data? Who verified the $4,000 figure? The answer is nobody in that room, which is exactly why videos like this one exist. If you made it this far, you already know these numbers matter. Subscribe. We break down every claim, every hearing, every rally where the math stops adding up. And drop in the comments, which number from this speech did you find most unbelievable? We'll build the full fact check thread from your responses.